The storm was not just rain. It was a furious curtain of water that battered the asphalt of the back road as if the sky had a debt to settle with the earth. Marcus, a 44-year-old man with hands weathered by hard labor and a face marked by the exhaustion of raising a daughter on his own, drove his old Ford pickup with the caution of someone who knows a breakdown would mean the end of his monthly budget. The windshield wipers squeaked in a hypnotic rhythm, fighting the downpour that turned the landscape into a blurry gray smear. Marcus just wanted to get home, hug his little Naya, and forget that tomorrow might be his last day at the Heritage Textile Works, where rumors of layoffs had turned the workplace atmosphere into a preemptive funeral. However, something on the shoulder, a dark, rigid silhouette that defied the logic of such a terrible night, made him lift his foot off the gas and strain his eyes through the foggy glass. There he was, like a specter forgotten by time. An older man dressed in a gray suit that must have once been impeccable, but now clung to his thin frame like a second-soaked skin. He was not hitchhiking or raising his hand. He was simply walking with painful determination, clutching a brown leather briefcase against his chest. Marcus estimated the man's age at 60-something, a dangerous age to be out in such elements. His conscience began to scream at him, "Do not stop. It is dangerous." But then he thought of his own father who had passed away years ago and the vulnerability radiating from that solitary figure. With a sigh of resignation, Marcus flipped on the hazard lights and pulled the truck over, rolling down the passenger window just as thunder shook the ground. The old man stopped when he saw the pickup, but he did not approach immediately. His eyes beneath bushy gray brows scrutinized Marcus with a mix of mistrust and wounded dignity. It was not the look of a drifter, but that of a general who had lost his army. "Sir, get in, please. You are going to freeze out there," Marcus shouted, competing with the roar of the wind. The man hesitated a second longer before nodding slightly. He opened the heavy door and climbed in with difficulty, bringing with him the smell of ozone, wet earth, and damp wool. As the door closed, the silence of the cabin amplified the stranger's ragged breathing. Water dripped from his clothes, forming little puddles on the rubber floor mat, but he did not seem to notice. His attention remained fixed on the briefcase in his lap. "Thank you," the man murmured in a hoarse but polite voice that denoted refinement and years of command, though now it sounded broken. Not many would stop on a night like this to pick up a soaked old man. Marcus put the truck in gear. "I could not just leave you there, sir. This storm is not for anyone. My name is Marcus." The old man brushed a lock of wet hair from his forehead. "Reginald. My name is Reginald." There was a dense silence loaded with unasked questions. Marcus noticed that Reginald's hands were trembling, not just from the cold, but from a contained emotion that seemed heavier than the rain. "Where are you headed, Mr. Reginald?" "There is nothing for miles ahead, just the industrial zone and the old cemetery." Reginald looked out the window into the impenetrable darkness. "I am going to the town of Millbrook. My car decided to give up about 5 miles back." The white lie was obvious. There had not been any broken-down cars in the last 10 miles Marcus had just covered. However, the single father decided not to confront him. He knew what it was like to have to maintain your dignity when everything is falling apart. "Millbrook is on my way, Mr. Reginald. I will take you there, but first I am going to crank up the heat. You are shaking like a leaf." Marcus adjusted the controls, and hot air began to fill the cabin. Reginald closed his eyes for a moment, letting himself feel the warmth, and a solitary tear rolled down his cheek. The warmth of the truck began to thaw not just Reginald's body, but his tongue as well. "Do you work at the factory you mentioned? Heritage Textile Works?" asked the old man, caressing the gold clasp of his briefcase. Marcus gripped the steering wheel tightly. "Yeah, at least until tomorrow or until the new owners decide we are not needed anymore. I have been there 15 years, but they say they are going to automate the assembly line and that the new manager, some guy named Mr. Carlton, is coming with a sharp pair of scissors." The bitterness in Marcus's voice was palpable. He spoke of his fear of not being able to pay for Nia's tutoring, of the mortgage that ate up half his salary, and the suffocating feeling he had every morning when clocking in, wondering if his badge would still work the next day. Reginald listened with unusual attention without interrupting, absorbing every detail of Marcus's anguish. "Carlton," repeated the old man with an indecipherable tone. "It is funny how decisions made in glass offices can destroy wooden kitchen tables, is it not?" Marcus nodded, surprised by the metaphor. "That is right, Mr. Reginald. They see numbers, we see lives. My daughter Nia is 10 years old. She does not understand profit margins. She just knows her dad comes home tired and sad." Reginald turned his head and looked deeply at Marcus. In his gray eyes there was a spark of something that was not pity, but recognition, a kind of ancient fury waking from a long slumber. "Loyalty is a rare commodity these days, Marcus. You stopped for me. You could have just kept driving. Why did you do it?" Marcus shrugged. "Because no one should be alone in the middle of a storm, and because I want to believe that if I am ever in that situation, someone would do the same for me. I guess you call it karma, or just decency." Reginald smiled, a sad, tired smile that briefly lit up his wrinkled face. Decency, a word that many in my world forgot decades ago. "Do you know what I am carrying in here, Marcus? I am carrying mistakes. 30 years of mistakes, and only one chance to fix them." The atmosphere in the pickup truck shifted. It was not just a rescue mission anymore. Reginald shook his head slowly. "I am not going to Millbrook to get dry, but to face a ghost I created myself." The rain started to ease up while the town lights began to appear on the horizon. Upon reaching the entrance to Millbrook, Reginald gave Marcus directions that left him baffled. "Do not drop me in the center, son. Drop me in front of the factory's main entrance. I need to see it at night." Marcus looked at him puzzled. "To the factory, Mr. Reginald? It is closed, and the security guards do not let anyone in at this hour." But the old man insisted with a quiet authority that brooked no argument. "Just drop me at the gate. I have an old key." Marcus obeyed reluctantly, driving toward the huge industrial complex, which was the source of his livelihood and his nightmares. As he stopped the truck in front of the rusty bars, Reginald stared at the Heritage Textile Works sign with a mixture of love and hate. Reginald opened the truck door. Before getting out, he turned to Marcus. "What time do you go in tomorrow, Marcus?" "At 6 in the morning, Mr. Reginald, opening shift. If I still even have an access card," Marcus replied with a nervous, bitter laugh. Reginald nodded slowly. "At 6. Good. Marcus, listen to me closely. No matter what happens tomorrow, keep your head up. Dignity is not up for negotiation, not even with hunger." Without waiting for a reply, the old man climbed out of the vehicle and walked straight toward the security booth with his back stiff, ignoring the downpour. Marcus watched, fascinated and worried, as the night guard stepped out of the booth, flashlight in hand, ready to stop the intruder. But what happened next, completely, threw him. Reginald stopped right under the beam of the flashlight and said something Marcus could not hear. Then the old man held his leather briefcase up to the light. The guard abruptly lowered his flashlight. His aggressive stance melted into total submission. There was a brief exchange of words, and to Marcus's amazement, the guard unlocked the small pedestrian gate. Reginald turned one last time toward the truck, raised his hand in a wave, and disappeared into the darkness of the industrial complex. Marcus sat there for another minute trying to process what he had just seen before driving off toward home. Who was that man, really? When he got home, reality hit him hard. The lights were on. Nia was waiting for him. Walking in, the smell of reheated soup welcomed him like a warm hug. Nia, with her messy braids and teddy bear pajamas, ran into his arms. "Daddy, you were late. I was scared of the storm." Marcus scooped her up, burying his face in her neck to hide his own anguish. It was just traffic and rain, sweetheart. Daddy is here. I am always going to be here. That promise weighed a ton on his conscience. He knew that without work, being there meant watching her go without. That night, Marcus barely slept. He sat at the kitchen table going over the piled-up bills under the dim light of an energy-saving bulb. The mortgage, electricity, gas, school books. The numbers did not lie, and they had no mercy. He remembered Reginald's words. Dignity is not up for negotiation. Marcus clenched his fists. He decided if he was going down, he would go down fighting. He ironed his uniform with care like it was armor for the final battle. Morning arrived with a lead gray sky, reflecting the mood of the hundreds of workers crossing the gate at Heritage Textile Works. The mood in the locker room was like a funeral. No one was joking around, just nervous whispers and shifty glances. They say the list is already printed, whispered Deshawn, a guy from the die line. They say they are going to fire 40% of the staff today. Marcus slammed his locker shut. Let them say whatever they want. We keep working until they tell us to stop. But when they got to the production floor, they noticed something weird. The machines were off. In their place stood a makeshift stage in the center of the warehouse with a microphone and several men in suits talking amongst themselves. Standing out among them was Mr. Carlton with his shark-like grin and a gold watch that cost more than Marcus's annual salary. Attention, everyone. Carlton's voice boomed over the speakers. Leave your stations and come to the center. We have important announcements regarding the company's operational restructuring. The workers shuffled toward the center like cattle to the slaughterhouse. Marcus stood at the edge of the group with his arms crossed, feeling the bile rise in his throat. Carlton grabbed the microphone, visibly enjoying the fear radiating from the crowd. As you know, the market has changed. For Heritage Textile Works to survive, we must trim the fat. And unfortunately, efficiency requires sacrifices. He started talking about margins, automation, the future, empty words to justify the hunger of the families standing there. Carlton pulled a white envelope from his jacket. I have here the names of those who will continue with us in this new phase. If you do not hear your name, please stop by HR to collect your severance. He began to read. The list was short. Too short. Marcus listened with his heart hammering against his ribs. The veterans, the ones who had given their health for the company, were being systematically ignored. When he got to the M's, Carlton read Mitchell Jerome and skipped to the next one. Marcus felt the ground disappear beneath his feet. He had not said his name. He was out. 15 years of loyalty, erased in a second. The reading ended. More than half the staff was fired. Carlton smiled, closing the folder. To those staying, congratulations. To those leaving, thank you for your services. It was at that precise moment when despair was about to turn into collective fury that a loud metallic clang echoed from the upper walkway overlooking the plant. Everyone, including Carlton, looked up. Up there, leaning against the rusty iron railing, was a figure Marcus recognized instantly, even though he looked different. He was not the soaked, fragile old man from the night before anymore. In a dry, immaculate suit, and with a posture of absolute authority, Reginald watched the scene like a supreme judge. Mr. Carlton. Reginald's voice, amplified by the warehouse acoustics, crashed down on them like thunder. Carlton narrowed his eyes. Who the hell are you? Security! Get that old man out of here! But the security guards did not move. They were staring at Reginald with pale faces. Reginald started walking down the metal stairs slowly, every step ringing out with an ominous echo. I do not think security is going to remove me, Carlton, especially since their checks are signed with my money. A murmur of confusion rippled through the crowd. Carlton let out a nervous laugh. Your money? This factory belongs to the Pinnacle Capital Holdings. Reginald reached the factory floor, and the crowd instinctively parted to let him pass. He stepped up onto the platform and stood in front of Carlton. Reginald placed the leather briefcase on the table and opened it with a sharp click. He pulled out documents with official seals. You are right, Carlton. It does belong to the Pinnacle Group. And I am Reginald Thornton, founder, majority partner, and as of 8 in the morning, the sole owner. I bought out my cowardly partners who let you ruin my legacy. The name Thornton hit the older workers like a lightning bolt. It was the name on the foundation plaque from 1970. The name of the man who had built the factory with his own hands and disappeared after his wife died decades ago. Carlton turned pale, taking a step back. Carlton tried to stammer out a defense, but Reginald raised a hand, silencing him with a gesture of absolute disdain. Save your breath, Carlton. I have spent the last 2 weeks auditing your accounts from the shadows. I know about the diverted funds. I know about the bribes to suppliers, and worst of all, I know how you have treated the people who built this company. Reginald grabbed the list of layoffs and held it up high. You see red numbers and efficiency charts. I see families. I see loyalty. With a slow, deliberate movement, Reginald ripped the list in half, then tore it again, letting the pieces fall like confetti onto the concrete floor. The crowd of workers began to understand what was happening. A murmur of hope started to swell like a wave. Reginald stepped up to the edge of the platform, scanning the sea of hundreds of faces until he spotted Marcus. "Where is Marcus?" he asked, his voice booming across the crowd. Marcus's co-workers quickly stepped aside, leaving him standing alone in an empty circle. Marcus felt his legs shaking beneath him, not from fear but from the sheer intensity of the moment. Reginald smiled. It was that same sad yet warm smile from the night before. "Come up here, Marcus. Please." Marcus walked toward the platform, while Carlton glared at him with pure hatred. When Marcus got up on the platform, Reginald did not shake his hand like a subordinate. He hugged him like a long-lost brother. Reginald turned toward the microphone. "My car did not break down last night," Reginald confessed to the stunned crowd. "Last night, I walked here through the worst storm of the year. I wanted to know if there was any humanity left in this town before I decided whether or not to close the factory. Hundreds of cars passed me by. Trucks from this very company splashed me with mud and kept right on going. Even you, Carlton. You drove past in your German sedan and did not even tap the brakes. But this man who had every reason to be bitter and selfish, he stopped." Reginald painted the scene of the previous night with words that touched the heart of every worker there. Marcus did not know who I was. He did not know that I was the one who could save his job. He helped me because he has a noble heart, and a company run without nobility is destined for moral bankruptcy. Reginald turned toward Carlton, his expression hardening like steel. "You, Carlton, represent everything I want to wipe from my legacy. You are fired. Security, escort the former manager off my property." The guards obeyed with speed and barely disguised pleasure. Seeing Carlton being dragged out of the factory triggered an explosion of applause and cheers that shook the windows. Men and women wept openly, hugging one another. The dark cloud of unemployment had vanished in an instant. Marcus looked at Reginald with tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Mr. Reginald. Thank you for saving us." Reginald shook his head. "No, Marcus. Thank you. You were the one who saved this factory last night. If you had not stopped for me, I would have signed the sale papers this very day, and everyone would be out on the street." Reginald raised his hands, asking for silence again. "Starting today, there will be no mass layoffs. We are going to modernize, yes, but with training for everyone. Marcus," he announced, "I am offering you the position of General Plant Supervisor. I want you to be my eyes and ears here." Marcus was left breathless. Supervisor. That meant a salary that would not just pay off the debts but would secure Nia's college education. "But Mr. Reginald, I only know how to fix looms and load boxes. I do not know anything about management." Reginald smiled. "Management is learned in courses the company will pay for. Decency. Marcus, that is not taught. You either have it or you do not. Accept it." Marcus looked down at his colleagues who were nodding in support. He thought of Naya. "I accept, Mr. Reginald. I will not let you down." The handshake that sealed the deal was photographed by dozens of cell phones and would become the legend of Millbrook. Reginald spent the rest of the morning in the management office, reviewing documents with Marcus by his side. However, Marcus noticed something worrying. Every time Reginald thought no one was looking, he put his hand to his chest and grimaced in pain. His skin in the daylight had a grayish tone. At noon, when they were sharing a coffee, Marcus dared to ask, "Are you feeling okay, boss? You look pale." Reginald set down his coffee cup with a trembling hand. "I am not going to lie to you, Marcus. My time is limited. I have a heart condition that the doctors say is a ticking time bomb. That is why I came back. I do not have children who speak to me." "An estranged family?" Marcus asked softly. Reginald nodded with sadness. "A son. He left 20 years ago. We fought over control of the company, over my stubbornness. I told him I never wanted to see him again if he walked out that door. And he kept his word." "It is never too late to look for him, Mr. Reginald," Marcus said. "Pride does not keep you warm when it is cold." Reginald looked at Marcus with a mix of admiration and envy. "You have a simple wisdom, Marcus, that is worth more than all my degrees. But first, I have to make sure this ship does not sink." That afternoon, leaving the factory, Marcus walked toward his old Ford truck with his head held high. However, when he got to the parking lot, he saw something that made his blood run cold. Right next to his truck was Carlton's luxury sports car. The former manager was leaning on the hood of Marcus's Ford, smoking a cigarette with a look of manic hatred. "Enjoy your moment of glory, garbage boy," Carlton spat, walking toward Marcus threateningly. "You think you have won? That factory has hidden debts that not even Reginald knows about, and I have got the documents that can sink you all." Marcus held Carlton's gaze, feeling his initial fear turn into a cold, determined calm. "You might have documents, Carlton. But Reginald has something you will never have, the people's loyalty. If you try to sink this factory, you will be facing 300 workers who have nothing to lose, so get the hell out of here." Carlton, surprised by Marcus's quiet ferocity, got into his vehicle, peeling out with a screech of tires that sounded like a declaration of war. The next morning, Marcus arrived at the factory an hour early, finding Reginald already at his desk, surrounded by folders. The old man had deep, dark circles under his eyes. Marcus closed the office door and told him every detail about the run-in with Carlton. "Secret debts," Reginald muttered. "I knew Carlton was a crook, but I never thought he would borrow from outside lenders in the company's name. If that is true, the factory's assets could be seized before we can react." Reginald stood up, but a sudden dizzy spell forced him to grab onto the back of his chair. Marcus rushed to his side. "Sit down, Mr. Reginald. You cannot go on like this." "There is no time to rest, son," Reginald wheezed. "If Carlton leaks those documents to the banks today, our credit will be frozen, and we will not be able to make payroll next week. We have to find those papers ourselves." They spent the next 6 hours going through boxes of files that Carlton had not had time to destroy. Around 3 in the afternoon, they found what they were looking for. Hidden in a mislabeled folder marked as preventive maintenance, they found a series of "I owe us" signed by Carlton using the factory's machinery as collateral for unauthorized high-risk loans. The amount was astronomical. "My God, this scoundrel mortgaged the very heart of the factory," Reginald whispered. The sheer scale of the disaster caused Reginald's heart to give out. He clutched his chest, letting out a choked gasp, and slumped onto the desk. "Mr. Reginald," Marcus yelled, catching him before he fell. The old man was struggling to breathe, his lips turning blue. Marcus reached for the phone, but Reginald grabbed his wrist. "No, no hospitals. If word gets out that I am dying, the stocks will tank and the bank will call in the debt today." "I am not letting you die here, boss," Marcus said with determination. "I am taking you to my place." My neighbor was a military nurse. She will know what to do without alerting anyone. Marcus practically carried him to his truck. He drove with his heart in his throat, praying the old man would hold on. When they arrived, they went in through the back door, and Marcus laid Reginald down in his own bed. The neighbor, Miss Loretta, came right over. She checked Reginald's pulse, gave him a pill, and ordered him to rest completely. "It is angina aggravated by stress," Miss Loretta declared quietly. "He needs calm. If he gets upset again, he will not survive the next one." Nia got home from school a little later and found the strange scene. Marcus explained the situation to her gently. "He is a friend, Nia, a very important friend who needs us to take care of him." The little girl nodded solemnly, taking on her role as an improvised nurse with touching seriousness. Reginald woke up at dusk. The first thing he saw was a wall with children's drawings stuck up with tape. He turned his head and saw Nia sitting on a wooden chair watching him with big, curious eyes. "Hi," the little girl said softly. "My daddy made vegetable soup. Do you want some?" That simple action, that selfless care from a little girl who did not even know him, cracked the old man's armor. "Yes, please, little one," Reginald replied with a cracking voice, feeling that in this poor house there was more wealth than in his entire empty mansion. Marcus came in with a tray of steaming soup. Reginald ate slowly, savoring every spoonful. "Marcus," Reginald said after finishing, "you have a treasure here. This little girl is worth more than all the stocks in the market." Reginald stared into space with glassy eyes. "My son's name was Malcolm. He was the same age as Nia when I started ignoring him for work. I thought I was building an empire for him, but really I was building a wall between us. When he wanted to study music instead of business, I kicked him out. How stupid I was, Marcus." The moment of confession was interrupted by the shrill sound of Reginald's cell phone. Marcus reached for it. The screen showed private number. Reginald gestured for Marcus to answer and put it on speaker. "Reginald." Carlton's voice sounded distorted and mocking. "I guess you are looking for the promissory notes. Well, it does not matter if you find them anymore. I just sent digital copies to the central bank and the local newspaper. Tomorrow morning, Heritage Textile Works and your assets will be frozen. Enjoy your last night as a millionaire old man. You have lost." The call cut out. Marcus looked at Reginald, expecting to see defeat, but what he saw in the old man's eyes was a spark of fresh fury. "Marcus, hand me my briefcase," Reginald ordered, struggling to sit up. "If he wants a war, I will give him a war." "There is more than just old papers in this briefcase," Reginald said, his voice weak but firm, while his shaking fingers punched a code into a small banking security device. "I have a personal emergency fund. Money I put aside decades ago, far away from the company books. I was thinking of leaving something for Malcolm if he ever came back. Carlton does not know it exists. It is enough to cover the debt, but I need to do the transfer right now before the banks open and freeze the corporate accounts." Marcus ran to get his old laptop. The internet connection was slow and the tension in the room was suffocating. "If I do this, I am left with nothing personally," Reginald said. "If the factory fails, I will die in ruin. But I would rather die poor and with dignity than rich and a traitor to my people." The transfer went through at 3:45 in the morning. Reginald let out a long sigh and collapsed back onto the pillows, completely drained. "It is done," he whispered. "Carlton is in for a surprise." Marcus shut the laptop and took the old man's hand. "Okay, Mr. Reginald, we are going to the hospital. No more excuses. Your life is the only thing that matters now." This time, Reginald did not fight back. Marcus woke Nia up, wrapped her in a blanket, and the three of them got into the truck. When they got to the emergency room, the doctors moved fast. Reginald was admitted to the coronary unit, and Marcus stayed in the waiting room praying for just one more miracle. The next morning, Heritage Textile Works was like a scene from a movie. Carlton arrived at 8 in the morning with a team of lawyers and 2 bank auditors ready to shut it down. The workers were blocking the entrance in a silent strike. Carlton sneered at them. "Stand aside. This is over. The company is insolvent." But then an official black car pulled up. It was the bank's regional compliance director. He stepped out and walked right up to Carlton. "Mr. Carlton, we received a capital injection at 4 in the morning that covers the entire guaranteed debt. The company is solvent. However, we have evidence of fraud in the loan application. The police are on their way for you, not for them." Carlton was handcuffed in front of the 300 employees he had tried to destroy. His shouted threats were drowned out by the roar of applause. Marcus was not there to see it happen. He was still back at the hospital, holding on to Reginald's hand as the old man grew weaker. When he broke the news, the old man just smiled a little, his eyes staying closed. "Justice," he whispered. "Now I can finally rest." But Reginald had one last mission left. Summoning every ounce of strength, he pointed to his briefcase. "Open it, Marcus. There is a blue envelope at the bottom." Marcus did as he was asked. The envelope had a name scrolled across it in shaky handwriting. Malcolm Thornton. "I found him a year ago," Reginald confessed. "He is living in the capital. He is a music teacher. I never had the courage to go see him. Please give this to him. Tell him I am not asking for forgiveness. I just want him to know that I loved him right until the very end." Reginald Thornton passed away that same afternoon, just as the sun started to set. He died peacefully, holding the hand of a man he had met barely 48 hours ago, but who had become his true family. The news of his death shook the whole town of Millbrook. The funeral was packed. There were not any expensive bouquets from hypocritical businessmen. Instead, there were thousands of wild flowers brought by the workers and their kids. Marcus, wearing his only black suit, felt like an orphan all over again. But he had a promise to keep. The next day he left Naya with a neighbor and drove his pickup truck toward the Capitol, the blue envelope sitting on the passenger seat. He found Malcolm at a small music conservatory. He was a 40-year-old man with Reginald's same gray eyes, though his gaze was softened by a life of art. When Marcus introduced himself and handed over the envelope, Malcolm stiffened up. "Reginald, I have not heard from him in 20 years. Marcus told him the whole story. The rain, the factory, the sickness, and the final regret. Malcolm opened the letter and read it in silence. There were not any checks or legal wills in that envelope, just a 3-page letter where a father laid his soul bare, apologizing for choosing money over love. Malcolm wept, silent tears that washed away years of resentment. "I always thought he hated me," Malcolm said. "I thought I was just a disappointment to him." Marcus shook his head. "You were his greatest pride, Malcolm. He just did not know how to tell you that until he ran out of time." Weeks later, the official will was read. Reginald had left the factory ownership to his son Malcolm, but with a condition: lifetime management and rights for Marcus. Malcolm, who did not have any interest in leaving his music to manage looms, made a decision that surprised everyone. "My father built these walls, but you all built the soul of this factory," Malcolm told the assembly of workers. "I am keeping 49% of the shares as a silent partner. The remaining 51% will be divided between Marcus and an employee cooperative. Marcus will be the new CEO. My father trusted him when no one else would, and I trust my father's decision." The applause was deafening. Marcus, the single dad who was terrified of losing his job, now had the responsibility of guiding everyone's future. Marcus took on the role, not with arrogance, but with the humility of a man who knows exactly how much a screw weighs, and his office door was always open. Reginald's photo hung behind his desk, reminding him every day that dignity is not for sale. Nia was able to go to college later, but she never forgot the night a stranger slept in her daddy's bed. The Heritage Textile Works thrived under its new humane management, becoming proof that profit and people do not have to be enemies. And every time it rained hard, Marcus would stop his car to see if anyone on the road needed help. He knew that angels sometimes come disguised as soaked beggars, and that a simple act of kindness can rewrite history. The life of Marcus teaches us that we are not defined by our circumstances, but by how we react to them. He could have just kept driving that rainy night, and no one would have blamed him, but he chose to stop. He chose to open his door, and in doing so, he opened the door to his own destiny. Reginald found redemption, Malcolm found peace, and Marcus found a purpose. Sometimes we feel alone in the storm, thinking no one is coming to save us, without realizing that we have the power to be someone else's rescue. True wealth was not found inside Reginald's leather briefcase, but in Marcus's decision to share his heater with a stranger.